This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and the community in which you now reside.
My name is Brent. I live in Eastham, Massachusetts.
How did you end up on Cape Cod?
Well, my grandparents bought a place here back in the 50s. My mother grew up summering here. Then when we were children, we ended up moving summering here. And then my parents divorced when I was very young, and we ended up moving here full time back in the early 70s.
We learn in school about fear and tension during the Cold War. How did this affect you and your community?
Well, I wasn't in the military at the height of the Cold War. That was back more when the Cuban Missile Crisis was happening. I'm considered, I guess, a Cold War veteran, and I really didn't hear that until just a couple of years ago. I was just a guy that joined the Navy in the 70s and 80s, and it was more of a chess match between the United States and Russia when I was in. It was like we were watching them, watching us, watching them kind of thing. That's what was happening when I was in.
What other family members were in the military?
My father was a Vietnam helicopter pilot. He served. I had a great uncle that was in World War II. And I imagine if you keep going back further and further, I had a lot of uncles that served. And there was always somebody or another from my family in the military at some point.
What inspired you to join the military?
Like when I grew up here on Cape Cod, if you weren't ready for college and you wasn't sure where you wanted to go or end up, the military was a good way to explore the world a little bit and get some of those life experiences that kind of turned you into an adult. I joined right out of high school because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I didn't want to sit here and do nothing. So I joined the Navy so I could travel, and I did a lot of it when I was in the Navy.
How did your family respond when you joined the military?
Pretty much. I mean, I just grew up with a mother, and there was 4 siblings. I don't remember them really making a big deal of it. It was kind of, we came home, said, "Hey, guess what I did?" And I was gone like a week later. And that's as far as that went.
Could you describe your training experience?
Yeah, boot camp was it wasn't a big deal for me. I went in and I was in fairly good, or actually real good physical shape when I was that age, and I was bright enough to keep my mouth shut the whole time, and I became a squadron leader in boot camp, and I was you know, I don't know. I just had that way about me where nobody really messed with me because I never really messed with anybody else, and I got through it relatively easy. I thought it was more of a mental challenge than a physical challenge, anyways. Describe
a day during a training session.
In boot camp, you just got up early. You went to breakfast. You did everything as a group. You went together. You went through. You did some kind of physical fitness stuff during the morning. Then you went through classes most of the day. There was different things that you got to do, like going to the gas house. That was kind of an adventure. There was a lot of different things that you could do training-wise, but in the Navy, it was more classroom than anything else.
What kind of things did you learn in the classroom?
Just seamanship, how to be military is basically what they wanted to teach you. They wanted to teach you that life had changed as you know it, and how to think in a military fashion, how to act in a military fashion, how to respond to people, how to address somebody, how to be addressed, how to physically dress. It was just basically them trying to retrain you on their way of thinking.
How long did the training last?
I think it was 8 weeks when I went through it. They were bouncing around between 8 and 13 weeks back then, and I can't remember if I did 8 or more. To tell you the truth, we're talking back in 1979 when I did it, so it was a long time ago.
Where was your boat located during your military career?
The ship I was on was out of San Diego. I was on an aircraft carrier, CV-64, the USS Constellation. We were out of San Diego, but we spent most of our time overseas. I spent a large part of the 4 years I was in was spent at sea and overseas. I got out of boot camp right around the same time they took the Iranian hostages, so there was a big military presence, a show of force that was happening in the Indian Ocean at that point in time, and I was a part of that.
What was your job on the boat?
I navigated the ship. I was a quartermaster second class, which is different than what you hear about in the Army or the Air Force. We had nothing to do with supply. Quartermasters are, it's a rate that goes back hundreds of years, and it's basically, we navigated. I navigated. I learned how to celestial navigate, then terrestrial navigate, and then electronic navigation also was stuff that I did.
As a navigator, what were you required to do?
Pretty basically report the ship's position most of the time. Chart courses. I was also in charge of all the charting supplies and stuff like that. I had to make sure that when we went somewhere, we had the proper charts for it, and that was pretty much my job as far as that goes.
What different navigation methods were there, and how did they work?
Celestial was the one that I got more excited about, and that was with a sextant and shooting the stars. That was the way they had done it for years and years. Electronic navigation was brand new when I went in. As a matter of fact, all the GPS things that happen right now and how you can get your position just even on your phone. When I was in, Magnavox was starting. It was a thing called the Navstar. It was about as big as a backpack. It was actually designed for artillery, but they were because there was only 2 satellites up at that point in time that gave that information. So it was a lot easier to catch those kind of signals that they would send out to sea, and off a moving ship, it would determine if it was right. The information we would get, sometimes it would put you in the middle of downtown Las Vegas, so it wasn't always correct. They've come a long way since the birth of satellite navigation.
Could you describe a typical day on your ship?
Yeah, you were basically there, and you worked up to 20 hours a day, sometimes 24. The way it was put to me when I took over my department, when I took over as the LPO, if somebody's working 20 hours a day, that 4 hours they have off, they're not getting in trouble. So you would stand a couple watches, you would work a full 8-hour work day, and then anytime, the ship I was on was a diesel powered, it was not nuclear. So we'd have to take on fuel about every 4 to 6 days. And then they would also take on JP5, which was jet fuel at that time. And so we'd have to go on an unrep, and they would resupply us at sea. And that's kind of a tricky thing, and that can take up to 4 to 5 hours, maybe sometimes longer, depending on how much equipment, fuel, or supplies they had to ship over to us. So we'd have those all. And then it was a constant training method that was going on. So every day there would be a new training scenario coming up, and depending on what that was is how much you had involved in that one also.
One moment.
Camera broken?
What did you eat for food?
Well, anything they served us. You couldn't be too choosy. And eating was you got in, got the job done, and got out of there. Because the more time it took you to eat, the less time usually you had to sleep. So you pretty much, I don't know, I was never too picky when it came to eating when I was that age. I've found now that I've gotten older, I'm a little bit more picky than I was when I was, 18 years old. So yeah, I just ate about anything they had to offer.
Did you ever have to dock for supplies?
No, well, there wasn't too many places that we'd actually tie up to a pier. San Diego, Pearl Harbor, and the Philippines were the only ones that I ever tied up onto. Every place else that we went, we would moor out to sea, and they would take Liberty launches to bring you in and out.
And if so, how often?
How often
did you dock for supplies?
We didn't dock for supplies that much at all. We ended up getting supply while we were out to sea. It was called an unrep, underway replenishment. That's how they did it. They'd come alongside another deep draft vessel, and they would be up to 120 feet apart, and they would put over spanner wires, and they'd transfer everything back and forth on those.
What was the procedure for encountering storms?
Most of the time, because I was on a carrier, we just rode them out. Some of the other ships would run for cover. We would ride them out. There was some times when we were some pretty nasty weather. I mean, the flight deck was the bow of the flight deck was 70 feet above the water line, and I'd watch that get buried in green water. I worked on the bridge, which was 110 feet above the water line, and we'd take on salt water up there in some of the bigger storms. It'd be kind of funny. You'd walk down the passageway, and the next thing you know, you're walking kind of on the wall, then you're walking on the floor again. I always thought one of the funniest things in the world was when you go down to the pier and you see a ship that's been out for a long time, watching the guys walk off the ship and on the pier, because they're watching every single, because when you're on the ship, you can feel which way the ship's moving, and you adjust for it, and that's the way it's almost like muscle memory in your head. And when you get onto something that's not moving, it's kind of wild. They kind of almost like wait for something to move as they walk. It's kind of comical.
Reflecting on your time in the military, what was your favorite memory?
I had a lot of fond memories. It was, for me, I think it was the places I saw. You know, I had a couple good friends, but a couple guys that I actually, after hindsight, I really kind of wish I'd stayed more in touch with some of those guys. But for me, I think it was the places I went and the things that I saw.
How about your worst memory?
I hate to say it like this, but I was pretty young. And when you're young, you just kind of, at least I did, took everything in stride. It was nothing really bothered me a whole lot.
Where did you go after your military experience?
Oh, when I got out? I hung out in Washington for like a month or so, and then I came back here.
What are your thoughts on how the military is run today and what it does?
You know what? I don't know as much about the way it's run today as I did back then because I'm not a part of it. It's totally different than when I was in. But I think anybody that chooses to serve their country should be looked up to. And I think all those guys that are out there, or guys and girls, I'm sorry, people that are out there serving their country deserve every opportunity to go ahead, serve their country, then come back and expand on their professional lives as well as they can, I guess.
Okay, now we need to end. To clarify a prior question, what is a sextant?
A sextant is an instrument that's used to read the angle of the stars in lieu of the horizon. And between using that to measure that angle, and with a whole lot of math, you can kind of figure out a line of position that you can draw on a chart. So if you get 3 stars or 3 bodies, because you can use the moon and other celestial planets, that you can actually get a 3-point fix. It tells you exactly where you are on the chart.
Did you choose to be a navigator, and if so, why?
I went in as just a seaman recruit. I got advanced to seaman apprentice right in boot camp because I was just the guy chosen in my company to do that. And then I went to San Diego, and they flew me out to the ship. It was underway at the time with like 15 other guys. And when we got off the helicopter, they asked somebody that they said, asked me if I wanted to volunteer, anybody wanted to volunteer for the navigation department, and the rest of them were going to go to the deck department. So I looked around and saw a bunch of guys chipping paint, threw my hand up real quick and said, I'll go to navigation. And it actually worked out well for me because I became very apt at it. It was good. It was a good fit.
What parts of the world did you travel to?
I was out of the Pacific, and so I went through Asia, Australia, a lot of the South Pacific, a lot of the Indian Ocean. We spent a lot of time in the Gulf of Oman.
Which place was your favorite, and why?
I would have a hard time picking a favorite. I mean, everything was different, and I was pretty young, so everything was, coming out of East Ham, it was pretty amazing to see all the different spots in the world, and I took it all in. To actually say one thing was more popular with me than another I don't know, I'd have a hard time choosing.
Have you traveled as much after your military experience?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. I kind of got the travel bug. I'd been all through Europe. I went and spent about a year traveling through the South Pacific. I did a lot of surfing back then. I spent about 5 months in Australia, 2 months in New Zealand.
How does this compare to your military travels?
It was different. I mean, when I was in the military, I was living on the biggest yacht in the harbor. You know what I mean? And when I traveled, otherwise, it was usually a backpack and very few things. I traveled very lightly. I'd usually travel at night, so I didn't have to pay for a place to stay. When I did the Pacific trip, the only thing of value I really had was I had an underwater camera and I had my surfboard. And that was about it. Some t-shirts and some shorts. That's how I traveled.
During your time in the Navy, did you meet any prominent people? And if so, who?
Yeah, I was lucky enough to, I was on board the ship. The USS Constellation was also known as America's ship. I was on board the ship when Ronnie Reagan, then president, came out and signed a bill. And I was actually running my department at that point in time. And they asked me as the leading petty officer to pick somebody to go have lunch with the president. And I looked around and said, I'm picking me. And so I got to meet Ronnie Reagan. With him was a pretty big, Ed Meese was there, who turned out to be the Attorney General. Later on, it wasn't at that point in time. There was quite another group of people. And I think Caspar Weinberger, when he was Secretary of Defense, and believe it or not, the one guy that stands out in my mind that I met him in a couple different places, and a couple of times he came out to the ship we were out to sea was Orville Redenbacher, the guy that made the popcorn. He was, yeah, that's kind of funny. He had the bow tie and everything. He was a bigwig in the Republican Party, from what I understand, because he was in places that we were actually, they were considered classified, and he showed up a couple times. I'm like, so he had some political pull somewhere.
What bill was President Reagan signing?
He signed a bill, I think it was, and this was going way back, I think it was he signed a bill to build a new destroyer class, a new type of Navy ship, is the bill that he was signing at the time.
What were the preparations for Ronald Reagan's arrival?
Well, they cleaned the ship quite a bit, and believe it or not, one of the funny stories is he was on board. He was on the bridge, and I'd shown him how to steer. He said he had a yacht, and he was good as a helmsman. And when he was on the helm, they came on the ship, and it was on Marine One, and this guy came out. There was a ship coming out of LA at the time, and they had the right of way, but we were kind of going in a certain direction, and they were on the radio with the ship trying to get the ship to veer off. And the ship who had the right of way said, "No, we're not doing it." And they said, "Well, we have a distinguished visitor on board. Look at our bow." And it was, Marine One was up there, and they kind of still said, "Nah, I don't care who's on your ship. We're not moving." And then this guy walks out of the back room, and I remember he was tall. He had the dark suit and the dark glasses. I mean, there was a bunch of Secret Service guys, but this guy wasn't one of them. And he walks out, and the ship's coming, he's coming off our starboard side a little bit, and walks out, gets on the radio, and he whispered something on the radio, and to this day, I wish I could have figured out what he said. Put the radio back down, doesn't even look at the ship, turns around and walks away, and the ship did a U-turn, got out of our way. I've always wanted to know who that guy was and what he said.
Was it an honor or a burden to have Ronald Reagan on board?
It was an honor. I mean, he's the commander-in-chief. We were basically working for him and the American people, but it was pretty impressive. I mean, you got to understand, I was at that point, I think I was 19 years old. And I literally sat, when I had lunch with him, I sat right across. I mean, I could have reached out and touched him, and he was that close. We talked, small talk quite a bit, but he was a pretty personable guy. But yeah, it was pretty much an honor.
Could you describe any other outstanding events on the ship?
Well, there was all kinds of things. I don't know what you would consider outstanding. Like I said, it was considered Cold War era. Like I said, it was kind of a chess game. We were followed around by what they used to call a Russian AGI, and it was pretty much a big radar spy ship that would follow us around everywhere we went. It was kind of looked like a fishing trawler, but they didn't do any fishing. It was kind of funny, and we would, they'd play chicken every once in a while when we're alongside. When you're on an unwrap, you're alongside two deep draft vessels, and you're 120 feet apart. You're kind of constricted into your maneuverability, and these guys would come where they would have the right of way and try and make us veer off and stuff like that. We got rammed by a Libyan freighter in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It was a ship. It was a merchant ship, and there was no shipping lanes out there, and it was showing red over red, which means.
One moment.
You good to go now? There you go. It was showing red over red, which means that it's not maneuvering and it's dead in the water. And just when we got up to within about 3 miles of it, they threw their running lights on and they were doing about 15 knots good. And we didn't have time to disengage with the ship, and it kind of hit our port quarter, put a little ding in it, a little hole in it. And it's funny because we were more than 1,500 miles away from any land, and within an hour and a half, the Russians were there with what they used to call a bear. It looked like a big B-52. It was one of their big aircraft, and they were flying very low over the water to take pictures of the damage. It was almost like they knew it was going to happen to get there that quickly. It was just kind of silliness like that happened. But I would say the highlight on board ship was probably when the president came out.
Would you recommend that your son join the military, and if so, why?
I would recommend that he followed his dreams to wherever they take him. If the military is part of it, that's up to him. I mean, I firmly believe that it did a lot of good for me. If it wasn't for, I grew up on the Lower Cape without a father, and if it wasn't for high school sports in the military, I'm not sure where or how I would have ended up. It definitely defined or helped me define what kind of person I wanted to be, and led me down that path. So I would recommend it to anybody that hasn't got a direct plan, some kind of school, education, a trade, or something like that. If you're not too sure what you want to do, it's not a bad way to go.
That's a good question. Were there any ceremonies while on board the ship?
Well, there's all kinds of different ceremonies and military ones, but I think the one that stands out closest to me was becoming a shellback. The shellback initiation goes back hundreds of years, way before the United States had a Navy. Actually, way before there was a United States, and it's a ceremony to celebrate when a sailor crosses over the equator at sea. And when I was in, they still celebrated that wholeheartedly, I should say. It was pretty much a 2-day hazing or initiation. I wouldn't put the word hazing to it because hazing is illegal these days, but there wasn't so much thought of hazing back then as more of an initiation. Some of the things that they did then, if you were known as a polywog before you became a shellback, is they would line everybody up that was already a shellback and on 2 lines and run a gauntlet. And some of the people had taken fire hoses and ripped the edges, and they'd tape up the ends, and as you ran through there, they'd give you a whack in the back. But if you can think about this, an aircraft carrier is at sea with an air wing is almost 5,000 people. Think about 2/3 of those people maybe have already become shellbacks. That's a big line, you know what I mean? So that didn't happen as bad as it could have, but they did a bunch of different things. I remember one of the things they did to me was they shaved my head with graphite grease, and that was hard to get everything clean after that. But you were out to sea for a long time after that, so it didn't really matter. I just remember at the end of it, you just took the clothes you were wearing, took them and just threw them off the fantail, and somebody got you with a fire hose to get you as clean as you could possibly get until you got to hit the shower to get all the other stuff off you that they did. But it was pretty much a 24-hour celebration where there was a lot of pain being, I don't want to say pain, but it was all done in good heart. But there were some people that we had a couple broken limbs and some other stuff that went on with that happening. But yeah, the shellback initiation was one of the bigger ones.
Were there any funny experiences while on board the ship?
Yeah, I remember one of the things that I thought, I look back now, that was kind of funny. We'd gone through some training exercises, pretty extensive. We were in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And the AGI was right there, not too far. They were usually not more than 1.5 miles away from us. And we just got to an unwrap. So I hadn't been to bed in probably almost 48 hours. And I was sitting up, and we had about 6 hours to go on the watch. And I remember letting a lot of the watch team go and said, guys, just go down and crash out. I'll take the last 6 hours of this. And when you guys relieve me, I'll go, get my 8 hours of sleep in. And I remember kind of being up at the chart table, kind of leaning back, and it was probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, and you kind of, everything, all the lights up there are red, so it's not like you can't see, but it's kind of dark, and it's kind of like almost tough to stay awake at that point in time. And I remember sitting there leaning against the bulkhead, which is a wall, and just kind of almost dozing off a little bit. And just as it happens, right off the beam, a big white flash happened. And I'm like, in my mind, when you're going through the training and stuff, they tell you about when a nuclear weapon goes off, the first and only thing you usually see is the big white flash. So I'm like, well, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And I remember there was only 4 of us up on the bridge and the opposite of the deck. I remember him yelling something, a profanity, pretty quick. And we're looking at each other trying to figure out what's going on. And all of a sudden, a big red flash. Then another big green flash. And we got on what they call the big eyes, which is a very high-powered pair of binoculars. And we're looking at the Russian AGI. And apparently they allow drinking on those Russian ships because those guys looked like they were having a good time. So we had to radio back to the fleet to ask permission to radio these guys because we thought they might have been in distress. And if they were going to be in distress, we were going to say, we'll come and save you, just hand over all your electronics first, kind of thing. And I remember they finally got permission, they radioed over, and the guy, probably one or two of the only people that spoke English on board that ship said, no, we're here celebrating your victory over Nazi Germany. It was VE Day, and we didn't know it, and they were having a big party over there. It was just kind of funny, My son's right here, and he asked me to tell a story that I actually tell my students. I teach high school now at Cape Cod Tech, and I talk to the kids about it. And it's about my first trip into Hong Kong. I'd gone in, and there was a very famous place there that most people got their first fleet tattoos when you got there. And I remember standing in line for the Liberty launch, and you got to understand, back then, I think I was making like $243 a month, and you got paid twice a month, so I split that in half is what my paychecks were. On board the ship, there was this old master chief who had been in he'd almost gotten to the point where they're going to tell him he's got to retire. And this guy had ink everywhere legally possible. He was the guy that had the old battleship across his chest and the girls' names crossed off all the way down his arm. He was an old crusty, salty guy. And he was from Boston. For some reason, he found out I was from New England, and he liked me for some reason. And so I remember standing in line. This guy comes walking up to me and goes, "Shipmate, how much money you got?" And I'm like, oh my goodness, this guy's going to take my money. There's not a whole lot I can do about it, And I remember standing in line and saying, "Oh, Master Chief, I haven't got a whole lot of money." He goes, "Good, you're coming ashore with me." And I'm thinking, geez, why would he, I don't have any money, and why is he going to take me ashore? But anyways, the good thing about going with the Master Chief is I got to skip line. I got to jump up in front and get on the next Liberty launch that went in. And we got into the harbor, and the place where all the nightlife and everything was off one way, and the garment district was off in a different direction. And all of a sudden, we're heading off in this different direction. I'm going, but Master Chief, the guys are all going this way. And he goes, I'm going to show you how to do this town. I'm going to show you how to do it right. And I remember we walked into a tailor shop, which was, they were only like I can't even tell you how many there were, but they were all like 12 by 12 rooms that you walked into. And he walks in and tells the proprietor, he goes, my shipmate and I want new suits. and we're thirsty. So all of a sudden, he's sitting there pulling his stuff out, and this woman comes by with a tray and gives us each a beer. So I'm sitting there going, well, that was pretty slick. How'd he do this? You know, so we finished what we were doing, and we saw what this guy had to say, and he goes, we haven't made up our mind. We'll be back to you. And Master Chief took me. We went into the next place down the road. He goes, my shipmate and I want new suits, and we're thirsty. So about 10, 15 tailor shops later, we're feeling pretty good. And we'd already met, I'd already made plans to meet all the other new guys at this place at midnight. That we were all going to go get our tattoos, our fleet tattoos. And so Master Chief was still hanging with me, and we went down there, and everybody's looking at the walls trying to figure out what they're going to get and everything. And there's probably 25, 30 people in there waiting to do this. And, excuse me, guys, I'm sorry about that. Kiwi. So we're sitting there, and I'm looking at all the pictures, and I'm talking to the other guys, and the Master Chief comes over to me, and he goes, shipmate, why are you going to put something on your body for life you wouldn't hang over your mantle for 10 minutes? And it made sense to me at the time, and I got on the line and never got my fleet tattoo, never got a tattoo after that. So that was kind of a comical story.
Thank you, Mr. Warren.
There you go.